He'd been working the organic farm for 5 years, planting seeds, hauling feed, mending fences under the Montana sun. Just another elderly ranch hand trying to earn honest wages in his golden years. Until armed men stormed the property, claiming it as their own, and suddenly the quiet farm worker revealed why his movements were so precise, his awareness so sharp. Earl William Garrett was 69 years old, with sun-weathered skin that looked like worn leather, and steel-gray hair that perpetually needed a trim. His calloused hands were permanently stained with engine oil and Montana soil, his broad shoulders slightly bent from decades of physical labor, and his pale blue eyes held the kind of quiet intensity that came from seeing too much of the world in uniform. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue this incredible tale of hidden service and unexpected heroism, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories about quiet guardians living among us deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter more than you know. Sunrise Valley Organic Farm stretched across 340 acres of pristine Montana grassland, 30 miles southeast of Billings, where the plains met the foothills of the Beartooth Mountains. The Henderson family had owned this land for 3 generations, transforming it from a struggling cattle ranch into one of the state's most successful organic operations. Tom Henderson, third-generation owner, ran the farm with his wife Sarah and their 2 teenage children. They raised heritage Angus cattle, grew organic vegetables for farmers markets across 3 states, and maintained the kind of sustainable operation that required skilled hands, early mornings, and workers who understood that farming wasn't just employment, it was stewardship of the land. 5 years ago, they'd placed a help wanted ad in the Billings Gazette. Experienced farm hand needed, must be reliable, self-motivated, comfortable with livestock and machinery, housing provided. They'd expected applications from young ranch hands looking for seasonal work or migrants following harvest seasons. Instead, Earl Garrett had shown up at dawn on a Tuesday morning driving a beat-up Ford F-150 with Montana plates and tools that had seen decades of honest use. He didn't say much during the interview, just demonstrated that he could start a temperamental tractor, calm a nervous heifer, and repair a broken fence post with materials at hand. Tom Henderson hired him within an hour. "Best decision I ever made," Tom would tell other ranchers at the monthly Cattlemen's Association meetings. "Earl works harder than men half his age, knows more about equipment than most mechanics, and I've never had to tell him the same thing twice." The family had come to depend on Earl completely. He lived in a renovated cabin behind the main barn, a simple structure that had once housed seasonal workers, but had been upgraded with modern insulation, plumbing, and a wood stove that kept it comfortable through Montana winters that could drop to 40 below zero. Earl's daily routine was precise and unchanging. Wake at 4:30 a.m., make coffee strong enough to dissolve horseshoes, and begin the morning rounds that kept a working farm operational. Check the cattle for injuries or illness, inspect water systems for freeze damage, monitor feed supplies, and identify maintenance issues before they became expensive problems. He could birth a breached calf in a blizzard, rebuild a diesel engine with basic tools, construct fence that would withstand Montana weather for decades, and handle 1,000-pound bulls with the calm confidence of someone who understood animal psychology. But what made Earl truly invaluable was his situational awareness. He noticed things other people missed, changes in animal behavior that indicated weather shifts, equipment sounds that suggested impending mechanical failure, and environmental details that could prevent accidents before they happened. "It's like he's got radar," Sarah Henderson often said. "Earl sees problems coming before anyone else even knows there's a problem." What the Henderson family didn't realize was that Master Sergeant Earl William Garrett had spent 30 years developing exactly those observation skills in environments where missing details could get people killed. Earl's cabin was furnished with military precision and civilian comfort. Single bed made with hospital corners, wood stove that provided efficient heat, a small kitchen equipped with cast iron cookware that would last generations. Everything functional, nothing wasted, organized with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to live out of a rucksack for months at a time. But certain aspects of the cabin would have raised questions if anyone had examined them closely. The windows were positioned to provide clear sight lines in all directions across the farm. The door had been quietly reinforced with steel plates and commercial-grade locks. The small closet contained work clothes, winter gear, and a footlocker that hadn't been opened in years. Inside that footlocker were items from another life. Dress uniforms, still carrying the sharp creases of military precision, combat boots that had walked through jungles and deserts most Americans couldn't locate on a map, and medals that represented operations classified at levels most government officials would never see. A bronze star with V device for valor in combat, a Purple Heart for wounds received during a classified operation in a country that officially wasn't hosting American military personnel, multiple commendation medals for actions that would never be detailed in public records, and photographs, black and white images of younger men in jungle fatigues, desert camouflage, and civilian clothes worn in places where American soldiers weren't supposed to exist. Men who had trusted Earl Garrett with their lives during operations that balanced on the knife's edge between success and catastrophic failure. Master Sergeant Earl William Garrett, United States Army Special Forces. 30 years of service including 8 combat deployments, countless classified operations, and a service record that read like a catalog of conflicts most civilians never heard about. Green Beret qualified at Fort Bragg in 1978. Ranger School graduate with honors, advanced urban warfare training, wilderness survival instructor certification, expert marksman with weapon systems ranging from precision rifles to improvised explosives. His specialty was unconventional warfare, operating in small units behind enemy lines, training indigenous forces, conducting reconnaissance in hostile territory, and completing missions that required improvisation, adaptation, and absolute reliability under impossible conditions. The military had been Earl's calling from age 18, when he'd enlisted straight out of high school in Kalispell, Montana. His father had been a World War II veteran who had rarely spoken about the Pacific Theater, and Earl had grown up understanding that some men were called to serve something larger than themselves. 30 years later, that calling had been fulfilled with distinction. Earl retired with full honors in 2015, his service record reflecting the kind of dedication that kept America secure through conflicts that never made evening news broadcasts. But retirement hadn't been easy. After 30 years of purpose-driven service, civilian life felt empty. Earl had tried various jobs, security consulting for defense contractors, training law enforcement agencies in rural tactics, even teaching survival courses to weekend warriors who wanted to play soldier without understanding the weight of actual service. The job advertisement from Sunrise Valley Farm appeared in the Billings Gazette on a Tuesday morning when Earl was drinking coffee in a diner and wondering what the hell he was supposed to do with the rest of his life. Experienced farmhand needed. Must be reliable. Earl Garrett had been many things during his military career. Lethal, efficient, dedicated, but above all, he'd been reliable. When other units failed, Special Forces completed the mission. When situations became impossible, Green Berets found solutions. The Henderson farm offered something Earl hadn't realized he needed: simplicity. Honest work with clear objectives, problems that could be solved with skill and persistence, and the satisfaction of making things grow instead of taking them apart. The work suited him perfectly. Many skills that made him an effective soldier translated directly to agricultural life: equipment maintenance under field conditions, problem-solving with limited resources, working efficiently in all weather conditions, and maintaining constant awareness of environmental threats. Because even in rural Montana, threats existed. The first indication of trouble had emerged gradually over the past month. Small things, barely noticeable to civilian eyes, but unmistakable to someone with Earl's background. Unusual vehicle traffic on county roads that traditionally carried only local ranch traffic. Unfamiliar tire tracks in remote sections of Henderson property where hunters and hikers rarely ventured. Surveillance patterns that suggested organized reconnaissance rather than random trespassing. Earl had mentioned his observations to Tom Henderson, but couched them in language that wouldn't alarm a family man who'd never faced organized threats. Notice some strange tire tracks up near the north pasture. Might want to keep an eye out for poachers during hunting season. Tom had nodded, made a mental note to check game cameras, and forgotten about it within a week. But Earl hadn't forgotten. Military training doesn't disappear because you change careers, and 30 years of threat assessment had taught him to trust instincts that civilian minds often dismissed as paranoia. Someone was conducting surveillance on the Henderson property. Professional surveillance, organized and methodical, suggesting capabilities beyond random criminal activity. Earl had quietly reinforced security measures around the farm. Better locks on equipment sheds, motion sensor lights near the main house, and discrete cameras monitoring access roads. Nothing obvious enough to alarm the family, everything effective enough to provide early warning if his suspicions proved accurate.
Saturday, September 7th began like every other morning. Earl woke at 4:30, made coffee that could strip paint, and walked to the main barn to begin daily rounds. The Henderson family was in Bozeman for their daughter's wedding weekend, leaving Earl alone to maintain operations until their return Sunday evening. The cattle were healthy, water systems functioned normally, and overnight weather had been mild enough to prevent equipment problems. Earl completed morning chores by 7 a.m. and moved on to maintenance tasks that required the family's absence, rebuilding a grain elevator motor that had been making concerning noises, replacing worn hydraulic lines on the main tractor, and checking fence integrity along the property's remote northwestern boundary. At 9:15 a.m., while inspecting fence posts for winter damage, Earl discovered something that confirmed his worst suspicions. Fresh tire tracks in muddy ground, deep treads from heavy vehicles, leading from a seldom-used county access road toward the most isolated section of Henderson property. The tracks were recent, made within the past 12 hours, and suggested multiple vehicles carrying significant weight. Earl followed the trail. 2 miles into backcountry that most people never saw, he found what he'd been dreading: a professional encampment that had no legitimate reason to exist on private agricultural land. 3 military surplus tents arranged in tactical formation with clear sight lines and defensive positions. Communications equipment that belonged to law enforcement or military units, not civilian campers. Vehicles with license plates from multiple states, all parked to facilitate rapid departure. And weapons, enough firepower to outfit a small army. Earl used skills learned over 30 years of reconnaissance missions, approaching the camp with techniques that were muscle memory from countless operations in hostile territory. What he discovered made his blood run cold. This wasn't a hunting camp or militia training exercise. This was a staging area for domestic terrorism. Maps of Billings marked with government buildings, schools, and civilian targets. Operational timelines written in military terminology suggesting coordinated attacks. Communications logs indicating contact with similar cells in neighboring states. And most chilling of all, photographs of the Henderson family, their daily routines, and detailed surveillance notes about farm operations. The terrorists had been watching Sunrise Valley Farm because they needed secure staging areas for operations that would kill innocent people. And they'd identified the Henderson family as potential witnesses who posed unacceptable security risks. Master Sergeant Earl Garrett had spent 30 years protecting American citizens from exactly this kind of threat. The enemies had changed, foreign terrorists replaced by domestic extremists, but the mission remained identical: neutralize threats before they could harm innocent people. He was photographing evidence with a compact camera he carried for documenting equipment repairs when he heard voices approaching through the trees. Multiple men, moving with military precision, discussing operational details with professional terminology. Earl took cover behind a fallen log and listened to conversations that revealed the full scope of their planned attacks. Phase 1 initiates at 0600 tomorrow. Federal Building, Courthouse, Sheriff's Department. Simultaneous strikes, maximum civilian casualties. Transportation is secured? 3 teams, separate routes, rally point established 12 miles north of target zone. What about the farm family? They've been gone all weekend, but the old man is still working the property. Loose ends get eliminated, permanently. Can't have witnesses who might remember vehicle traffic or unusual activity. Earl had heard enough. These weren't random criminals or disorganized extremists. This was a coordinated domestic terrorist cell with training, equipment, and operational planning that would result in mass casualties within 18 hours. And they intended to murder the Henderson family to cover their tracks. Master Sergeant Earl Garrett had spent 30 years protecting American citizens from exactly this kind of threat. The enemies had changed, foreign terrorists replaced by domestic extremists, but the mission remained identical: neutralize threats before they could harm innocent people. He could retreat to the main road, find cell phone coverage, and contact federal authorities. But FBI response teams would need hours to organize, deploy, and assault a fortified position. The terrorists would escape, relocate, and execute their attacks from alternative staging areas. Or Earl could do what he'd been trained to do for 30 years: neutralize threats to American citizens using tactics, terrain, and 30 years of unconventional warfare experience. The camp contained 5 men, all armed with military-grade weapons, all focused on final preparations for tomorrow's attacks. They'd chosen their location because it was remote, defensible, and they assumed the only potential witness was an elderly farm worker who posed no credible threat. They'd made several fatal errors in that assessment. Master Sergeant Earl Garrett began his assault at 11:30 a.m., moving through Montana wilderness like he was back in Afghanistan's Hindu Kush mountains. Every technique learned over 30 years of special operations training came into play: terrain analysis, concealment and camouflage, close-quarters combat, and psychological warfare. The first terrorist never saw him coming, neutralized silently while checking communications equipment, secured with zip ties, weapons removed and safeguarded. The second was taken while conducting perimeter security, eliminated with techniques that left no opportunity for alarm or resistance. The remaining 3 realized they were under attack when their companions failed to respond to radio checks. But by then, Earl had achieved tactical superiority through positioning and surprise. The engagement lasted less than 8 minutes. When it was over, 5 domestic terrorists were secured with their own restraints. Their weapons cache was neutralized using improvised explosives created from their own materials, and Earl Garrett was calmly documenting evidence that would prevent multiple terrorist attacks across the northwestern United States. He drove directly to the Yellowstone County Sheriff's Office in Billings, walked into the building wearing his farm work clothes and carrying documentation that would change how law enforcement agencies viewed rural security threats. "I need to speak with whoever handles federal terrorism investigations," Earl said quietly to the desk sergeant. The officer looked skeptically at the elderly man in dirt-stained coveralls. "Sir, if you have information about criminal activity, I can take a statement during normal business hours." Earl placed his retired military identification on the desk, followed by photographs of the terrorist camp, weapons cache, and operational documents he'd recovered. "Master Sergeant Earl Garrett, United States Army Special Forces, retired. I've just neutralized a domestic terrorist cell operating on private property 30 miles southeast of Billings. They were planning coordinated attacks on federal buildings tomorrow morning. You need to contact FBI Counterterrorism Division." The desk sergeant stared at the documentation, then at Earl, then reached for his phone to make the most important call of his law enforcement career. Within 2 hours, the Henderson farm was secured by federal agents. The terrorist camp was processed by FBI evidence teams, and Earl Garrett was providing detailed briefings to counterterrorism officials who couldn't believe a single retired soldier had prevented what could have been the worst domestic terrorist attack in Montana history. "How did you know to look for them?" Special Agent Martinez asked during the debriefing. Earl adjusted his worn baseball cap, his weathered hand steady despite the day's events. 30 years of military training teaches you to notice when something doesn't belong. Those men didn't belong on Henderson land, and they sure as hell didn't belong in America. The story never reached public media. Prevented terrorist attacks, neutralized extremist cells, and classified evidence all disappeared into federal databases that most Americans would never see. Earl returned to Sunrise Valley Farm that evening, completed his normal chores, and was feeding cattle when Tom Henderson called to check in on operations. "Everything okay out there, Earl? Seems like there was some kind of law enforcement activity in the area today." Earl looked across the peaceful Montana grassland, watching heritage cattle graze in fields that had been protected from threats the Henderson family would never need to know about. "Everything's fine, boss. Just had some trespassers on the back 40. Local authorities handled it." Tom Henderson never learned why federal agents had cordoned off his northwestern pasture for a week, or why Earl had been unavailable for questioning during that time. He just knew that his most reliable employee continued showing up every morning, working with the same dedication and maintaining the farm with standards that seemed impossibly high. But other ranch families in the area noticed changes. Earl began offering informal security consultations, helping neighbors identify potential threats and improve operational security. Law enforcement agencies quietly sought his expertise on rural threat assessment. And sometimes, late at night, when the Montana wind carried sounds that seemed wrong for agricultural country, other farmers would remember Earl Garrett's advice about staying alert, trusting instincts, and understanding that threats could emerge in the most unexpected places. "You ever worry about trouble finding us out here?" Sarah Henderson asked Earl one morning while he was repairing a water pump. Earl looked up from his work, his pale blue eyes scanning the horizon with the automatic awareness that never completely disappeared. "Ma'am, trouble can find you anywhere, but it helps to have people around who know how to handle it when it shows up."
Earl Garrett continued working at Sunrise Valley Farm until arthritis and age finally forced actual retirement at 76. He never spoke publicly about his military service, never revealed the details of what had happened in the back pasture that September weekend. But the Henderson family kept Earl's cabin exactly as he'd left it. And Tom Henderson made sure that every seasonal worker understood they were continuing a tradition of vigilance that had kept the farm safe during dangerous times. Because some people never really retire from protecting others. They just find new ground to defend and new families to keep safe. And sometimes that quiet dedication prevents disasters that the people being protected will never even know they avoid.